Right, it's time. It's time to talk about higher order components. This is, according to the React docs, an advanced topic, so please be aware of that, I guess. Um, Higher order components are something you're definitely going to run into in external libraries. One of those would be Redux. And Redux is cool, but as I've mentioned before, this is probably not something that we're going to end up using at Tag. So I wouldn't be super concerned if you look at Redux and you're like, this is really confusing. Because its use case is pretty limited to something where state is huge and needs to be shared across an entire application and all of this. But it does have a really good example of a use case for higher order component. So their higher order component is connect, which is like a curried higher order component. It's like super sick. Like this is really slick stuff, but it's something where if you need state across an application, but you don't want to constantly have to manage like where that's coming from and keep it in a specific place. The connect higher order component gives you these options of, I want to map specific state or specific dispatches or apparently merge props, other options, and then it wraps your component. We're not going to get into a use case that's this complex. This is kind of nuts. If you go in and you read the documentation in the React docs, since it's an advanced topic, they jump right into it, and it's pretty nutty. It's well, I mean, this is their idea of a basic implementation and explanation. Maybe it connects with you. Maybe it's something that works in your head, but even reading the documentation, initially I had kind of a hard time totally grokking this higher order component pattern. So, in our branch, HOC, we have a higher order component that we can kind of walk through and explain how it works. So if you remember our previous application, there was tons of logic in here. We were using hooks. There was a lot going on in one component, which I didn't particularly mind looking at, but some people might. Some might not like having all of that business logic mixed in with their markup, or however you want to kind of interpret that. It might not look or feel good to you. So there's this other option, which is a higher order component. My issue with it is this. So we're wrapping our component as we export it. So we import with to-dos here, which we'll get into kind of how that's built and what that's doing in a minute. But we import with to-dos here, and as we export, it takes our component and it's injecting these props, right? So I've left it this way intentionally so that it's very clear exactly what's happening, whereas in practice I would prefer to, destructure, what is it, items, loading, add item, and remove item. So these are functionally equivalent, right? And this is definitely better to me and easier to reason about than props.this.that, and especially when you're chaining anything more than two deep, I start to cringe. Just kind of object access. The deeper you go into nesting, the more fragile it becomes. So there's probably some more material in that just on its own. But as you can see, this works. But where's the logic? It's all abstracted away. It's all abstracted away in with to-dos. So higher order components, the goal here is to abstract logic into something that is reusable. Now, it's arguable that a to-dos list is not a great use case for this, but go with me here. So we have a function. Keep in mind, this is a function that is taking a component. Now, this is returning a class. So right off the bat, we're returning a React class. This class has lifecycle hooks, and in one of these lifecycle hooks and component did mount, we're making a fetch. This is doing everything that this class component was doing. It's exactly the same behavior, but instead of returning all of the markup there, we're returning the component that is passed in, and we're injecting these props. So essentially all that's happening, just like a higher order function that takes a function and returns a function, we're taking a component, injecting props, and returning that component. We're returning a new component with those props. So it's, if you're familiar with higher order functions and how those work, this works exactly the same way. And so there's flexibility in that, which is nice. You can do really whatever you want here. And you can inject all sorts of props. And so that's why Redux is able to inject the store. I know that React Router uses high order components to inject routing data. I think it's with router is their high order component, and it gives you, all of the routing data for that particular component wherever it's rendered. It's really nice and handy when you need it. So this is something you'll definitely run into, and it's really good to have kind of a basic understanding of how it works.